So this idea of 613 commandments is actually something that I was taught very young. I mean, before I could, well, definitely before I could drink or drive, I definitely, I must have been, I don't know, 7 or 8 years old, maybe earlier. One of my earliest memories is being taught about the 613 commandments as a fact. And I remember studying when I was, a child in school. We were studying in the book of Genesis in chapter 32, verse 5. And there Jacob is meeting with Esau, his brother, and he's been away for about 20 years. He's been over in Aramea, in what today is Iraq, living with Laban. And when he introduces himself to Esau, he says, "Thus says your servant Jacob, I have lived with Laban and been delayed until now." And the way any normal person would read that is that's just he's just giving over the facts. But when the rabbis looked at this, they said, okay, there's a hidden message here. And the hidden message is in the word I lived. In Hebrew, I lived is one single word, the word garti. And what they did is they took that word and they said, what's the numerological value of the word garti, I lived? And that's actually an idea that comes from Greek. It's called gematria. In Hebrew, it's called gematria. Now, gematria is not actually an authentic Hebrew word. Gematria is simply the Hebrew form of the word geometry, which was the Greek word for essentially mathematics.
Right.
So based on this Greek idea that you can take letters and make them have equivalent values of numbers, the gematria of the word I lived is 613. And the rabbis understood Jacob's statement to Esau to say that when I was with Laban, I kept all of the 613 commandments. And this is actually a core doctrine in rabbinical Judaism. One of probably the big differences with the Karaite approach. The rabbis say that the forefathers going all the way back to Noah, and according to one opinion, all the way back to Adam, had all 613 commandments, meaning everything a Jew is required to do today, all the forefathers knew that.
They're insisting
to Adam.
They're insisting that our ancient fathers. See, I've heard this.
Kept the same commandments we did.
Yes.
Whereas Karaites look at it as having a gradual, what's called a progressive revelation.
Yes.
Which is that first God revealed to Noah very basic commandments, and not the 7 laws of Noah that are in the oral law.
Did Noah eat? Did Noah eat pig meat?
As far as I know, he did. Yeah, because what God commanded him not to do is not to eat blood,
right,
and not to murder.
Right.
He was allowed to eat meat as long as he didn't eat blood. So
right.
As far as I know, he did eat pig meat. There's no commandment against it, certainly that we know of.
All right, so you've heard this that is going through the Messianic.
This is a core doctrine in rabbinical Judaism that there was all the revelation happened in the beginning, including the oral law, and the biblical approach, the Karaite approach, as I see it at least, and as it's been understood historically, is that there was a progressive revelation. First, God gave certain commandments to Noah, and then He gave more commandments to Abraham than to Isaac and Jacob, and finally, the culmination of all the prophets, the seal of the prophets, was Moses,
right,
through whom He revealed all of the commandments. Now, the idea that there's 613 commandments, that number, again, that comes from this gematria, this Greek breakdown of the word into a numerological value of 613. But the Torah, nowhere in the Bible does it ever say there's 613 commandments. And in fact, it never counts them. I think that's significant. I think if God wanted to give us a number, He would have given. Look, He tells us for the 10 commandments, or the 10 words, actually.
Yeah.
He says these are the 10 words I'm revealing to you at Sinai.
Right.
And He has that number 10.
Right.
But for 613, He never says that. And the way I look at it is really this is Greek influence on Judaism.
Yeah.
The rabbis who were teaching these things 2,000 years ago, they lived under Hellenistic influence, and the fact that they use a Greek word, gematria, to describe this type of analysis of a word, breaking it down into numbers, tells you that there's a Greek influence there. The fact that they're using a Greek word, it's something the Greeks did. We know the Greeks did it. They took the writings of Homer, which the Greeks considered to be sacred writings, and they said, look, Homer, this is divine revelation, but it describes things that are irrational to us. It describes the God sitting up on top of Mount Olympus and getting drunk and having these festivals. That doesn't make sense to us as Greeks. This is what the Greeks said. And so they looked at the writings of Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey, and they said, okay, it must have a deeper meaning. And then they started to use things like gematria and say, well, it didn't really mean that there were gods up on Mount Olympus. What it meant is the value of this certain word has some deeper ethical teaching. And that's where the rabbis then were influenced and got these ideas. They said, look, if there's deeper meanings in the Iliad and the Odyssey, surely there are deeper meanings in our Torah, which is the deepest thing in the world. There's this tradition of reading, and here again, I'm emphasizing tradition, of reading the Torah every week in the synagogue. And the section they actually read this week talks about the two sons of Aaron, that they come and they bring this strange fire before God when the tabernacle is being dedicated. And it says that a fire came down and burnt them up on the spot. And you know, I think the moral of that story, the lesson there, is don't go doing things God didn't command you to do, and saying that you did. He gives you very specific commandments, and I feel like there's enough commandments in the Torah that we don't have to make up new ones. Now, the actual way of numbering them is 613. If you look at different lists of different rabbis, everybody's got their own list of what the 613 are. You know, the rabbis figured out through gematria the number, but it was only hundreds of years later that somebody came along and said, okay, well, what are those 613? And there's many different lists, and each rabbi has a different list. And the problem, I think, when you do that is you start to, I think, and I'm hesitant to use this word, but you start to legalize the Torah. What they do is they'll say, okay, you know, it says to rest on the seventh day and do no manner of work. Well, that's two commandments, right? One is a positive commandment and one is a negative commandment.
Why did they do that, Nehemiah?
Go ahead.
Why did they do that? Because I mean, I've been reading the 613, and I'm thinking it's superfluous. It's not necessary. Why are they adding this?
I'll tell you why they did it. This is a profound realization I had a number of years ago when I was in Eilat, Israel's most southerly city.
Eilat.
It's at the southern end of Israel, and in Eilat there is an underwater observatory. It's a really, really cool thing. It's essentially you walk down these stairs or take the elevator, and you're looking out onto the sea into a coral reef. You know, in most places in the world, I don't even know if you know anything about coral reefs. You have to take a boat 100 miles or even more off the shore. Here you literally walk into this building just on the shore, and you're looking out onto a coral reef.
Wow.
And I noticed that they had these beautiful fish. I mean, I was blown away with how beautiful the fish are. And I saw two different types of people who were appreciating the fish. On the wall, every once in a while, there'd be a column. You know, you have really thick glass to keep the water out because it's underwater. And there would be these big columns. And on the columns, there were the names of different fish with the pictures of what that type of fish was.
Uh-huh.
And I noticed there were two ways people were enjoying these fish. One is what I was doing, is I was looking out and just enjoying this combination of all these different fish. That's a beautiful one, and that's a beautiful one. And then I saw there were other people who would look at the picture of the fish on the wall and try to identify it. And it had a little Latin name there, what the Latin name was, and what the Hebrew name and what the English name was. And I realized that this is a really big difference between a Hebrew approach and a Greek approach. The Hebrew approach is to enjoy the collage, we have this word in archaeology, the assemblage, meaning everything together. I'm looking at it and I'm enjoying the forest. Other people, what they want to do is they want to say, look at the forest and say, that's a conifer and that's a cedar, and they're enjoying identifying things like that.
Yes.
And I think that's the approach the rabbis ended up taking. The Torah is very specific when it comes to certain types of commandments. Like look at the first 7 chapters of Leviticus. Excruciating details about certain types of sacrifices.
Yes.
So there, the Torah does have detailed information, but for other things, it doesn't do that. It doesn't define things in that precise of a way. And the rabbis were always uncomfortable with that. In the writings of the Middle Ages, the Karaites jokingly referred to the rabbis as the masters of. The Karaites were called masters of Scripture. That was the medieval name, and they called the rabbis the masters of measurements.
Masters of measurement.
Masters of measurements,
because
the rabbis always said you need to have a measurement for everything, a precise definition. If it says 7 days you will eat unleavened bread, the Torah doesn't tell us how much unleavened bread. So we need a legal definition of how much unleavened bread.
Right.
And you might think, well, what do I need that for? Well, my father, who is a diabetic and has suffered from diabetes for many years, isn't supposed to be eating really any unleavened bread. It's not good for him. It can cause all kinds of medical problems. But he eats the minimum required according to the oral law.
Like
and the
medicine.
Oral law, it says the minimum required every day of the 7 days is the size of an olive. However, the original oral law didn't tell us how big that, whether it was a Syrian olive or a Judean olive. And then they start that discussion. They actually have this discussion. The the oral law. I kid you not. My father will take the biggest chunk of matzah, of unleavened bread you've ever seen, the size of 3 or 4 slices of bread, and he'll munch that down and say, "Well, that's the olive according to the oral law."
Wow.
And the point is that they've lost the picture of the forest because they're focusing so much on the trees. And I think that's what this trying to break the commandments down into 613. I understand people are trying to get a handle on it,
Yeah.
but I think they're losing the forest for the trees.
Yeah, I think
Now,
that's
it's
right.
good to look at every commandment and study them, but to say, okay, we have to define the moon. Got to come up with 613 to fit that number. You end up missing the point, I think.
I saw that there were clear commandments. I thought they were very, very clear. Much better candidates for commandments than some of the ones they used.
So you could come up with your own list.
You sure could.
Why not?
Why not?